panel for the drama session, which I always think in these kind of things, you know, sit back, relax, and enjoy. We're here to entertain, which is what drama does. We have BRYAN ELSLEY. BRYAN is a writer and a producer. He runs Balloon Entertainment with Harry Enfield and is one of the UK's most revered and respected writers for over 2 decades, plus a bit probably now. From Nature Boy and Crow Road through to Skins, BRYAN has been at the forefront of most big changes and pieces of British television. TAHSIN, he is a graduate of the London College of Communication with an MA in screenwriting and also a graduate of the BBC's Writers' Academy. He's written for several drama series, including Holby, Casualty, and New Tricks, and he co-developed and has written multi-episodes of the series Father Brown for the BBC, and currently is developing some original series ideas. We have HUGO BLICK, a writer, director, and producer whose mantelpiece is currently so full of awards. He's having to build another one. I think for The Honourable Woman, Golden Globe, BAFTA, RTS, Peabody, South Bank Show, and he's currently multi-nominated for the Emmys. He also made Shadowland, and in the beginning there was Marion and Jeff, which is just the best place to start, I would think. And REGINA MORIARTY. Gina studied fine art photography before making the obvious career decision to work as a probation service tutor in South London for 10 years. For then, it was just a small and natural step for Gina to go and do an MA in screenwriting at the National Film and Television School. And as a result of that, she was selected for Channel 4's Coming Up strand, which resulted in half-hour piece Sammy's Wall. And in 2014, her piece Murdered by My Boyfriend, a 1-hour factual drama for BBC 3, was made and broadcast and received an RTS award for single drama, best single drama, and has been multi-awarded. So these group of minds today, we're going to discuss what is essentially the question of the single voice and the showrunner, which I think really boils down to a very simple question, which is UK versus US television, which one is best? And it's not, frankly, an unfamiliar debate. Some of you will have heard this debate before, both in session like this, or we constantly seem to be debating it behind the scenes. To be clear, it's not a debate I ever heard the Americans debating in the 7 years I was in the US. There was never, ever a debate about whether or not US television was better than UK television. I think they believed they knew the answer to that. And if the answer wasn't US television, then they didn't want to be part of that debate because it might look like they weren't team players. We, however, are both a lot more navel-gazing, a lot more inquiring, and very constant in asking ourselves this question. And during the session, we'd like to see if we can find some answers, so that in 10 years' time, when people are still, according to John, debating what state the BBC's in, no one will be asking themselves this question of US versus UK television, because we've sold it here. You guys get on with your BBC Charter and your stuff. We're solving over here. So I wonder, BRYAN, why we keep coming back to this question. Is it because we're fearful of what the answer is, or because we want to inform ourselves and learn, or because we want to protect and pull up the drawbridge? And I sometimes think that before we answer that question, we really need to have a clear idea of what the differences between the US and the UK are. You've worked on both sides of the Atlantic as a showrunner, and I wondered if you could just talk to us about what that role is and what it means in its different ways.
Yes, okay, I'll do my best. So showrunning is a long-established tradition in the American drama market, and it kind of emerged from the birth of television in America through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and the highly seasonal nature of the American production cycle, whereby there's a pilot season, and then there's a pick-up point, which is usually around May, June, when shows are commissioned into series. And traditionally that would be over 20 episodes, 23 or something like that, with maybe 12 or 13 of them commissioned up front to be on air in the autumn. So from June to autumn, there was a very short window to get the show on television. And that is where the showrunner role was, and the writer's room model was built, which is basically a mass production model to get large volumes of television, 26 episodes in under a year, effectively in 6 months. So that's where it started.
Born out of necessity, born out of almost like a business model demand to get television onto air for that certain point in the year when the advertisers, the car manufacturers needed to sell their cars, and they had to have these long-running things coming to that point at that time.
Yes, it's to do with advertising models through the year, and that kind of grew up and eventually kind of turned into this very well-established, indeed corporate model, whereby the showrunner was a writer who was often, if not always, the originator, and he or she, it was usually in those days a he, would sit at the top of that process and employ a hierarchy of staff underneath him or her to facilitate that production of scripts. And just to skip forward to where that is in the modern era, where there's slightly more flexibility even in the American market now, and perhaps smaller runs of shows are starting to be fashionable. But a writer's room will still have a showrunner, something called probably a co-executive producer, maybe a couple of them, those are number 2. Then maybe something called a consulting producer. All of these people are writers. Number 3, story editors. Number 4, then perhaps some other roles as well with staff writers at the bottom. Basically a room full of writers who are going to manage their own writing process. And they will report to network, to the executives at the network, who will come back with their editorial input, but essentially the showrunner operates that room.
So it's the showrunner who will be reporting to the network, not the individual writers. They'll be kind of like funneling up through that one overarching showrunner figure.
Yes, and the role of what we would call the script editor in this country does not exist, because the writers are empowered and skilled to actually, inside their hierarchy, take care of those writing needs. So the role of the script editor is held by these descending roles of hierarchy. And the important thing to say is that, you know, the showrunner role is obviously not just to do with the writing room. In the American model, the showrunner is effectively the producer of the show, is responsible for all aspects of production, and post-production and delivery of the show, and exists in charge of those processes. And that's a kind of thumbnail sketch of the American show running model.
So with the biggest rooms in that 22 episode plus network television, and then maybe in the main, I mean this is a gross generalization, but going down into a smaller shape room for cable where it's kind of like 10 to 12 episodes.
Yes, the number of writers in the room corresponds to the size of the order.
Yep.
But of course, one of the important things in American writers' rooms is there are staff writers there who will not write episodes. They're there to learn. They're there to contribute to the story discussion, and they're in a developmental role. They're looking for promotion, in fact. They're looking to come back next year with more skills, write a script. They might expect that script to be heavily overwritten by the showrunner, or of course one of the other strands in that hierarchy. And their ambition is to rise up that hierarchy. And that high level of organization is a very big feature of the American model. The first time I ever worked in an American writer's room, they gave me a Ford Mustang, and a parking place with my name written on it.
Oh, that's quite good, actually. With your name on,
yes.
You must have been very highly thought of at that moment in time.
As momentarily highly thought of.
Got taken away the next week, did it?
Things can change. So yes, and it is a very corporate model, and the writers are expected to be there with their pass at the gate at 9 o'clock in the morning, and they will leave at 6. And you know, when we discuss the show running model, I'm quite keen that we should not be importing it in its totality, that we should be
so
thinking
maybe not
about,
name the parking spaces. Have the parking space, but just not name them.
well, you know, in the modern broadcasting, you're lucky if you get a desk. So, you know.
Okay, make a note of that. More desks for writers. So, Brian, what was it like then when you went to America and you had to find a way of making skins within the framework that American television expected you to make? How did you cope with that? Because presumably you won't have had any similar experiences in the UK.
Well, I'd been practicing a little bit on the UK show.
Yep.
So the UK show, which I think we just completed season 4 of that show, and I had been effectively show running that show in the sense that I was in charge of the writer's room and I was effectively in charge of production. I worked closely with Charlie Pattinson, but he was running a busy production company, and frankly, he didn't have time to worry about me. So I had kind of learned some of the skills. When I got to the States and was handed my $16 million budget and told to start, I was literally given a room in Manhattan with some desks in it and told when they wanted the show.
Oh, God.
And, you know, and at that moment I did realize that I was a little bit lacking in some of the basic skills. And it was a very chastening experience, skins in the USA. Pretty much everyone who had anything to do with that show got it wrong. And much has been said about the problems of MTV and my difficult relationship with them. But I was having real problems too.
Yeah.
I wasn't absolutely clear how to do things. Yeah. And, you know, and I struggled with phone calls on which there would be 15 executives, none of whom were in the same city as me, and some of whom were on a freeway somewhere. It was all very tricky. And then we ran into editorial problems with lawsuits and right-wing pressure groups, which probably would be quite unusual to, you know, but all of those things together put us into the ground eventually. It was quite tough. But I did think as I walked away that if, and Armando Iannucci has actually proven this is possible, it must be possible for British originators and writers to exist in that milieu and not sink.
Yeah.
And in an environment where big American productions are coming to our country and hiring in, we need to be skilled in order for them to have confidence for us to be in some of the primary positions in those shows.
But I wonder if there are also things, it's not just about British writers being able to work in that way in America, but whether there are things from that process and framework that actually could be quite useful to us in our UK drama. And I was wondering, TAHSIN, if how your experience working on drama series in the UK compared to that. I would say, just understanding what you have done on Casualty and Holby, that your role would be the equivalent of a supervising producer in a big writer's room. So you would report into a co-executive producer who would report into an executive producer. But it's a responsible and empowered role. And I wonder how it compared to you.
Well, I never got a Ford Mustang, but I mean, my sort of experiences working on those different shows has kind of ranged quite a bit. I've had very good experiences, where I feel like where the notes have been great and I felt supportive. And I've also had experiences where I felt more like a puppet, and the notes have not always been helpful, where I felt like I've been hindered in the process of writing.
Who is giving you those notes?
They tend to, it varies. I mean, and it also depends when you get the notes. I mean, often it's the execs, or it might be the director. And if those notes come in late, and sometimes they do, if you get big notes that come in and you're at sixth draft or seventh draft, and you're almost at the end of what should be the end of the process, and what you end up feeling is that each draft you're doing is a first draft, and I've had that experience, and it's not a great position to be in, because you don't feel like you're doing your best work, especially when you've only got a week or two left before shooting, and you're having to do complete rewrites. Sometimes that's for logistical reasons, or an actor can't make it, but other times it feels like you're being given notes almost on a whim. And you're just being asked to change the script, not necessarily make it better, but just change it, and then change it, and then they'll shoot whatever they've got left at the end of that process.
Do you have who would be your showrunner? Who is the showrunner on Casualty? Is there a writer who?
Yeah, I mean, there's not really a showrunner model. I mean, I haven't done Casualty or Holby for a few years now, so it may well have changed, but I don't think it has. I mean, we had a lead writer. I mean, the last few years I've just been working on Father Brown, and that doesn't really require a showrunner, because each episode is self-contained. So there's no serial, so you don't need that kind of oversight. We did have a lead writer on Holby, but I mean, their job was to oversee the show. I mean, the closest that we got to a writer's room was story conferences, where every few months we'd be in a hotel, with all the writers pitching ideas for the continuing stories of the show. But then once you'd pitched those ideas, they would then be sort of taken away by the editorial team and the lead writer to then storyline that into the episode.
So there's no real kind of like consistent room. I mean, certainly
no.
In the US, if you were doing something at this length, there would be a writer's room in existence the whole time, and that would be both your place to have your story conference, and it would also be your place to look at the script that whoever in the room was working on at that moment for comment and sharing. And then you would give notes to the director about how you wanted it done, rather than wait for them to give notes to you. It does sound very different.
No, that's not the way it happened at all. I mean, one thing that doesn't happen, which I think should happen, is at the very least, even if you're not a showrunner, is just for the writer to meet with the director before it shoots. And it does seem kind of absurd to me that doesn't happen as just standard practice. That a week before it shoots, or a couple of weeks before it shoots, the writer has a meeting with the director where you just do a page turn of the script, just so that you can clarify your thoughts on particular scenes and make sure they understand what your attention is. They can point out things about the script that actually they don't think that's coming across, and so you might need to revise that scene. And it would save a lot of heartache, because what happens instead, you do rewrite after rewrite, you'll get notes filtered through from the director via the script editor, and everything, you're kept as far away from production as possible.
So rather than taking responsibility for it, taking responsibility for whether or not the script is of the quality it needs to be, whether or not it's the right length, whether or not it's on budget, whether or not it's working around actors' availability, someone else is taking responsibility for that, and you're filling in.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're given, you're told what your kind of parameters are and what your restrictions are. So you do know, you've got this certain number of exterior scenes, or this, or you've got a certain number of guest characters, and that's how many guest characters you've got. So you kind of know the format that you're working in. And you are responsible for delivering within those constraints. Yep. But I guess the problem is that there's always a go-between between you and everybody else, and the notes are always filtered through the script editor, and it can be frustrating sometimes that you're not in meetings. You'll get a phone call from your script editor where they'll say, "We've had a meeting. this is what this person said, this was that person said, these are your notes, and you hope that your script editor has defended you, championed the script and defended, you know, kind of shielded you from the more kind of outrageous notes or the notes that just aren't going to work. But sometimes you're really relying on your script editor to do that for you, and you're not in the meeting yourself to be able to defend your script. And so, you know, and also because you don't have that meeting with the director, just to clarify the whole script and make sure you're on the same page, as it were. You don't know what they're going to do with it. You don't really know until you see it in 3 months' time or 4 months' time whether it's gone okay or not. And sometimes you get notes back which are red flags, where you think, you know, you'll get a note where you think, God, the director or whoever's given me this note, and if I was to do this note, it's going to completely upset the script, or it won't make sense. I'll do this, but then that later scene isn't going to make any sense. And so obviously you then come back and you tell that to them, and you say, this is why that's not going to work, and hopefully you win that argument. But it is all the way through. It just seems a matter of kind of picking your battles. You know, which do I let go? Because you don't want to be really difficult, but you want to be a bit difficult. You want to be able to defend the script.
I think that's a good mantra for life. You don't want to be that difficult, but a bit difficult isn't so bad. But it does seem in a way that it's kind of almost like the diametrically opposed, whatever it is, to, you know, BRYAN, who gets, okay, here's your 16 million, get on with it, you're in charge. If it goes down, it's your fault. If it works, it's to our greater glory. But, you know, get on with it, you're in charge. And in your case, it's kind of like, well, we're in charge. If you could write this, that would be great, and we'll help you with the writing of it, but you're going to be kept away. The writing and the production are somehow separated. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's certainly the case on the continuing drama shows, because they're machines. They are kind of factories, and they're constantly churning them out. I mean, it's great training, I have to say, because you get to see something you've written on TV a few months after you've written it. You have to pull the rabbit out of the hat very quickly. The deadlines are ridiculous. You're having to really, you know, I've never worked so hard in any job I've ever done than as a writer.
Did your writing improve?
Yeah, I think it did. I think just through doing that and going through that process and writing to such tight deadlines and getting to see what works and what doesn't work
so quickly.
Very, very quickly. You develop tools and tricks, and you really do improve your writing. And the other thing is that doing those shows, doing somebody else's show, you still need to put your stamp on it. You want to feel like it's your episode. This is your episode of Holby. It's your episode of EastEnders. No one else could write this episode in the way that you're doing it. There's certainly more flexibility with Holby and Casualty, because you have to create your guest stories that then integrate with that serial. But even with something that's all serial, like EastEnders, you know, if you get 5-6 writers to do that same episode of EastEnders from the same story document, you'll get 5 or 6 different episodes. They'll be tonally different. Their focus will be different. There'll be different, you know, resonances in terms of the theme. So you learn a hell of a lot from working on continuing drama.
It does sound, in a way, just throwing out a recommendation here, that if I mean, the BBC has a large amount of airtime devoted to its continuing drama series, and it clearly is a great entry point for writers, and a great training. You know, you said you learned, and the fast turnaround, but if it's going to put that much time into continuing drama series, it kind of needs to be the very, very best training ground across the piece for future BRYANs and HUGOs that it could possibly be. And that looking at the roundedness of what that education is and the responsibilities that the writers have might well be just a suggestion of something to think about. Yeah. Peter Salmon. HUGO, I would say you are probably almost like the ultimate definition of showrunner, because you write, you direct and produce. I think, is it true that you are the first ever Emmy nominee for all 3 categories?
Yes, apparently. Well, that can all go. But yes.
No,
yes.
they can't take the nominations
only because
away.
of the singularity of each discipline, yeah. Yeah,
Right.
that's true.
So how did all of this come about? Is this something that you deliberately set out to do? Are you doing it because you can't bear it when anyone else does? What's the story behind this?
Well, it's always an accident, isn't it? You don't set out to do it all. It's only because no one else would do it in the first place. I had an idea of a little fellow in a cab, and it was at a time of men behaving badly. When you create ideas that are going to be sort of singular, authored, standalone, it's just great to have a look at the ecology and see what everybody else is doing and make sure you do something else. So there was this big lad culture, and I just thought, well, let's tell a story about a man who only wants his family, he wants the pipes and the slippers and his family back. And then the big twist is that he doesn't realize really that he's lost it all in such tragic circumstances. So this became this little piece called Marion and Jeff, which frankly no one wanted to make at all. So I had a little bit of money left over from another production, and I knew Rob Brydon from college, and we just made the pilot. And then we made the series with BBC Two. As always, BBC Two is the one that eventually comes in and goes, oh, it's weird. It's the same. I've never seen it
It's
else.
weird, we'll have it.
We'll have it. We do Tiffany jewelry here, no one else does. And they sort of let me, had a go. There was a good slot for it. And then it was a huge, it was relatively impactful. And because of the impact, then as things grew, strangely, I continued to write, direct, and produce anyway, because no one else would have done it in the first place, so now I'm doing it.
So it started from necessity, and then it just got into, this is the way that you want to create, this is the way. And how do you as a writer, director, and producer,
only because, if I'll jump in, you only do write, direct, and produce because you then protect the whole.
Right.
And you protect your contract with the broadcaster, the environment, which is to be absolutely distinctive, absolutely authored, but producerially, always make the day, always on time, always effectively under budget. So in a way, I have, a compartmentalized personality who's very able to kind of talk to the other element. And for example, as a producer, if I have a problem on the day, a script, sequence, we're going through to about 4 or 5 takes, I'm starting to think it's the script. Now, most writers wouldn't. Most writers would say, no, actually, it's everybody else. So my producer's saying, it's the script.
You have to have a good word with yourself.
Let's move that on, because we have to make the day.
Yeah, you're stuffing me up.
And nearly always, whatever is moved on to is better than the script was.
Right.
The script was the problem.
Right.
So that kind of compartmentalization, as it were, of personality is, I guess, a little unique. But it helps with the whole efficiency of telling what is a really, hopefully, distinct, bespoke, authored Tiffany jewel for BBC Two.
Why don't more people do that then? Is there a resistance to the writer, director, producer?
It takes you have to, before I do it, I have to sort of get into marathon training physically, literally. It is a huge mental demand for the period. It's a 6-month
I think that's why, honestly, that is where the rest of the writing community in the UK has gone wrong. They are not doing their training exercises properly. I think
that's maybe true.
We have cracked the problem of the US versus the UK. One side is lardy and the other is obsessed.
And nutritional. So it's about a very heavy draw on your engine for the period that you're... So preparation, again, is everything.
Right. And so, seriously, because I can understand that it must take tremendous stamina and tremendous clarity of mind to be able to go on location and hold those triple roles. Will this limit you to sort of single pieces in terms of a single film or a mini-series? Because how would it...
Yeah, it would be very different if you were going into a series effect over multi-series. You'd have to do something much more different. I would hope that the model would I think that the educational purposes of what you were saying about Casualty and the other, I think it's extremely valid. I think that's why it's there. I think if it needs to be tweaked, and it should be perhaps looked at because of the way in which you're describing it. But it's really purposeful. I think if you were making an authored piece, it has to go from the writer top down. It can't go from the execs. Obviously it can't. All we're trying to do when you make a project, all I'm trying to do is when I present it to a controller or a head of drama, is to say, I've got something.
That's not me anymore.
I know, but we started off. Yeah. I've got a thing of wonder that I really think you should be I want you to participate in it, be a part of it. I think and that's what you want that's what you want. So that kind of clarity of what it is, that's so important as well. That's the producer part of me, is when I come in to talk to someone about an idea, it has to be a singular sentence, ultimately. You know, the Honourable Woman was looking for reconciliation on the world stage because she couldn't find it in herself. That's it. And then I'm going to put on top of that it's going to be the most irreconcilable conflict we can think of, Israel and Palestine.
Who then do you collaborate with? Because you're occupying those 3 roles. Do you ever think, oh my God, I really need someone to talk to?
No,
is it location catering? Is it the broadcaster? Who is it?
Everybody.
Everybody.
Because that's the other thing of doing all these 3 things. I have this really dull analogy, and I apologize if it's been heard before, but it's in order to, you know, there's 300 people essentially that come with you on a journey of that kind of scale. But in fact, a little bit militarily, those are heads of department. So it's about 13 heads of department that you have to work with. And in order to get this to function just efficiently and beautifully, you have a nail. And a nail is in the middle of the desert. Everybody's going to gather around it, and that nail is my vision. It could be many nails, but it's this one. Everybody gathers around it, and I say that's what it is. And we all have to strike it. And crucially, we have to strike it at the same time so it doesn't get wobbled and everybody's working in synchronicity. But the top point is that they have to strike it for themselves. Once I've given the vision, what design does to this vision is entirely up to them. Right. In fact, during a shoot on The Honourable Woman, I only saw the designer on the last day of a 100-day shoot. Wow. So every time I was just moving into his space because he was entrusted to do exactly what he thought supported that vision. And I'm not there to micromanage him. I'm there to say, this is the big picture.
You must have had very clear conversations up front.
Right up front.
I'm wondering from that if part of the thing is maybe not so much in some ways the showrunner versus the single voice, because clearly most of the US showrunners would say they are a single voice. Vince Gilligan is a showrunner, but he's definitely the single voice. Is whether or not it's more a series versus mini-series / singles type of question. And Gina, I wondered about your experiences because you had a very different entry point to a lot of new writers in the industry coming in through single pieces. How did you find that experience and your role as a writer in that? Was that a kind of a HUGO piece or a TAHSIN or a BRYAN kind of thing? Where did you fit in?
Yeah, I think my experience was a little bit unusual for a new writer. Because I went to film school, which was a great help to begin with, but I managed to get onto the Coming Up strand, and that was a half-hour drama. So that in itself, that scheme was quite unusual. And during that process, and also sort of at film school, I'd made a few first contacts, like at the BBC and so on. So later on, when Murdered by My Boyfriend was commissioned, I was one of the people they thought of. And I think to have 2 single dramas to start off with is pretty unusual, because most people that I know who were either I went to film school with or just other writers I know, haven't been as lucky as to have that, because for me it was a really great experience. It was very nurturing, I was really helped along, and it was a hugely positive experience in both cases. But a lot of people I know start off, their first jobs are in continuing drama and so on, and I know it's quite a tough way in. It's really demanding and difficult, and obviously it's also a fantastic learning experience, but perhaps not quite so sort of nurturing as the experience that I had. I think I was really lucky.
It can vary. I mean, I've had good experiences and not so good experiences on the same show, and it kind of comes down to what's going on in production at the time, and who you're working with, and the particular producer or script editor that you're working with. I mean, I've had fantastic experiences, but the fact is that they are such huge machines, and you are a cog, and you have to meet those demands. And some stories are more difficult than others as well. You know, some stories are a real headache, and you're just twisting it this way and that way, and you just don't have much time to do it. And so you're constantly having to kind of pick yourself up, do another draft. And I have no, you know, obviously you have to do lots of drafts. The frustrating thing can be when you feel like each draft is a first draft. Because things are getting changed, serial is getting changed, and you have to unravel everything you've already done.
Gina, what would you say then in terms of, let's just look at, you know, some of the recommendations that we can offer out, because everyone's experiences are very different, and I think, you know, clearly part of the British thing is that it is a very mixed ecology. But what are the things in your experience that we need to hang on to? Because you would say, I think you said to me, it was by and large like 100% positive. So what is it that we should be saying? Right, we should make sure these things are preserved. We must have this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, because I was on the Channel 4 Screenwriters programme, which was fantastic, and for me that was a great way of meeting people, a great way of kind of an introduction to the industry after finishing film school. And that kind of thing's great because it does support you, introduces you to people, and you know, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get anything made out of it, but those sorts of schemes are fantastic, a fantastic kind of first point of entry, and there probably aren't enough of things like that. You know, things like coming up, and also there's this really good new scheme now, BBC iPlayer Shorts. Things like that are a fantastic way for people to get in.
More competitive entry points to.
It is really competitive. That's the thing.
Yeah,
about
but at
it,
least it's a path through.
Yes, yeah. I think things like that are fantastic. If you can get into anything like that, I mean, that can really set you up. If you can just get one thing into one sort of scheme of that kind, then that can set you up because you learn about the industry, and you know.
As an alternative to the more corporate climbing of the ladder, if you like, of the American writers. Brian, you rather brilliantly on the media show yesterday, you likened our British drama industry to the car industry. I'm going to get this wrong, but something like we've got to watch out because otherwise we're going to end up being bought out and making stuff for someone else and eventually disappear. What are your feelings on how we pull together the sort of mixed ecology, less regimented kind of approach in some ways that we have here, in order to preserve the quality and eccentricity of British work for the next 20-odd years?
Well, I think we shouldn't get hung up too much on processes. There's a lot that's great in the British way of making drama. It's an environment where someone like HUGO can emerge quickly and resolutely and supported. I still work with very experienced drama producers in a kind of partnership which I've evolved for myself. I think the key thing is that we should have a needs-based approach. You should look at the show, you should look at the writers, maybe look at the directors and say, how are we going to organize ourselves here? What is the best way to get the best result out of our work?
And allow that flexibility.
And allow flexibility. It's a kind of not spoken of secret that many long-running drama series in this country are essentially dysfunctional. And what happens is a kind of chaos of executives and badly conducted script processes with writers getting fired and the constant first draft scenario where everything is a first draft. I think you need to look at what your show is, how many episodes there are, who are the central artistic creative forces behind that, who may be writers but they may not be, and you have to properly organize around that. And we should not be organizing our television drama like it was just as the Americans have an echo of advertising cycles, British television drama has an echo of the colonial service. It speaks to a time when fellows at the BBC were basically people who from another age would have been running a region of India. And, you know, and it's that we need to step away from. We need to step towards properly focused, budgeted, processed drama production, which can happen on a tiny scale, and I would really argue has got to start happening on a massive scale as well.
And with the writer at the heart of it?
I think that should be a part of our palette of options.
Can I just say that we have spoken somewhat about the correlation between the UK and America. I think in the cable environment, we were just listening to Josh Sappin from AMC, and they look towards the UK in a way that they are incredibly envious of the ecology that we have. And you know, you're going to have to allow me with this multiple representatives here to bang a drum for BBC
Go for it. Go for it.
Because every time I'm in the States, they go, BBC Two. It is the most remarkable platform of drama. And it is internationally, it has an international reach. Yes, of course, we made The Honourable Woman with AMC, but it wouldn't have even begun as the idea that I just discussed had I not gone in to meet with BBC Two. And we now sell that show, particularly to 54 countries internationally, from which it would never have occurred without that platform. And again, the BBC Two could be a victim of its own success. It has returning things like Peaky Blinders and Line of Duty that we need to protect and if not promote the future of BBC Two drama in this pretty perilous time because it has a huge reach and it is hugely admired.
So I know we've run out of time. I just want to do one thing. I wanted to ask everybody what their key recommendation, you know, given that we are here with the people in the engine room of our UK television industry. It's clear what I think were Hugo's suggestion for the way forward is, which is a lot more funding for drama on BBC Two. Gina, what would Gina, TAHSIN and Brian, what would you say, just as the kind of please do this, as the takeout for everyone in the room before we stop?
Well, for new writers starting out, I think just more entry points, different kinds of entry points for writers, yeah, that's my...
I'd probably just reiterate what I said before of just allowing the writer to meet with the director before it shoots. It's a small thing to do. It's an afternoon. It's a few hours.
We need to get a bit of that showrunner stuff in there.
I think just as a minimum, just to make that standard
just as a
practice.
base point request. Brian, have the last word.
Everyone needs to get behind the BBC. Everyone needs to fight for the BBC to become a driving force in an international market, and the benefits it will bring back to this country are beyond any form of measure, economically, culturally. And if drama is to succeed on the big stage up against Netflix and Amazon and all these people with $500 million in their back pocket on any given day of the week, someone has to support our British industry so that we can stay competitive in those international markets.
And I think then, if just one last word, my recommendation would be that if anyone's got anything to do with drama, talk to the writers. It's very clear from just this session today that they have a very, very big view on what works and what doesn't work so well about how we make our drama here. And let them have voice and put them in charge, because better things tend to happen that way. Thank you very much. I'm sorry there was no time for questions, but it wasn't my fault. It was all the other panelists beforehand. They just went on too long. Thank you.